Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Growth Leaders Podcast, where we bring you insights from the pioneers shaping industries and driving innovation. Today, we are privileged to have a true luminary in the electrical vehicle EV sector, none other than Rui Ferreira, the Chief Commercial Officer at Onto. Rui is just not an expert. He's actually a seasoned veteran with decades of invaluable experience in the ever-evolving landscape of the EV industry. His journey is not just a success story. It's an epic saga of facing challenges head-on, overcoming obstacles. Rui has been at the forefront, navigating through the complexities of the car fleet and the EV market. And Rui's insights are a beacon for those navigating the fast-paced and dynamic world of sustainable transportation. Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts as we embark on a fascinating journey with Rui Ferreira on the Growth Leaders Podcast. Most welcome, Rui.
Good morning, Peter. Thank you. And thank you for that introduction. I'm a little bit nervous now.
Yeah, that's not a problem. So just let me put the objective for the meeting here is having a dialogue with you here today is to give an insight also to other leaders in companies from small to bigger, how to think about the investment. It's normally pretty big investments in car fleets, and many are thinking about moving more and more to EV, electrical vehicles. Some go thinking about the hybrid, and some continues with the diesel and petroleum, being nervous of what's happening in the industry. So those are questions we would like to identify here in there. And I must also say your latest journey, where you are still on, is into Onto, which has been one of the most prominent success stories in the subscription space. With 7,000 vehicles and 20,000 customers, it has demonstrated real progress. Even so, the financial does not come together in the end and has entered now administration due to the financial problem. So my starting question here, Rui, what is happening in the EV industry right now?
Yeah, it's a very, very large industry. So almost first probably talk about the automotive industry, which is an industry now it's been around for 100 years, and an industry that has an incredible impact on the world economy, on society as we know it, to the mobility of people, of products. And right now that industry is facing its biggest challenge, was the shift to electric vehicles. And like any shift, there are going to be massive challenges that affect individuals, challenges that affect established companies, challenges that affect new companies, challenges that affect governments and policy. So it is an area that is going through a huge amount of change, and right now at a very turbulent time economically across the globe. And when we think about Europe itself, we went from a radical period right when EVs were starting to take traction. We went into a period with COVID, which obviously stopped everything in its track, and generated massive supply chain disruptions across the globe. The interesting thing is that COVID almost became an awakening for EVs, in the sense that people became more sensitive to the concerns. Suddenly our lives were disrupted by a virus, something you couldn't see. Suddenly other things came to the forefront, such as, climate change, people being more responsible in terms of their own carbon footprint. So we saw a huge change after right around the COVID period, where there was a huge interest in EVs. And you saw a huge rise in EVs on a very, very quick period during 2020, 2021, even into 2022. And that really came, let's call it an awakening of EVs and a big push. Obviously, you had the Nordic countries, which are far ahead. But the rest of
was
Europe
that
was really in that period.
Yeah, and was that due to only individuals, or was it mainly due to governmental incentives driving that? Because we saw Norway really took off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
I think it was a combination of both, right? I think it was a combination that, we do have to bear in mind we still don't have a cost parity between an EV and a combustion engine, where the EV is typically more expensive, ultimately driven by
yes,
the battery costs. And so government subsidies post COVID had a huge impact in decreasing the gap. But we can't kid ourselves. The gap, even with those subsidies, was still there. What there
yeah,
was coming out of COVID, there was this sentiment of, oh, I have to be able to do something myself as an individual. The consciousness of the environment and how sensitive and how fragile it actually is. And I think that awakened people into, okay, I'm going to do, I'm going to go to EV. We also have to bear in mind, there's never one thing that happens, right? You also had
mm,
Tesla becoming quite popular and very cool. So having an EV was trendy. It was a statement about, look, I'm environmentalist myself, almost. I'm doing
mm,
my piece, and I'm willing to pay. I can afford that slight premium to be able to get into an EV, right? And that's why you saw
yeah,
this huge growth. And you're absolutely right. Incentives had a big factor in that, in
yeah.
diminishing that cost gap, but that cost gap still remains.
And I guess also, since we have the environmental discussion in really every company today, if you, at least if you are stock listed, but also the small medium sized, they must be looking to get a footprint as a sustainable company, as such. I mean, as a reason to start investing into this uh,
Yeah, I
trend.
mean, absolutely. The ESG targets, or the sustainability targets that every company's had, became more to the forefront after COVID as well, right? So that didn't drive
Mm,
just consumers, but companies to start taking knowledge. And quite frankly, getting into an electric vehicle is not very complicated, in the sense, if you need to mobilize an entire organization towards an ESG goal, if you talk about, oh, how am I going to treat, the chemicals at a manufacturing plant? Well, it's pretty easy to go and buy 50 EVs compared to changing the whole
mm,
manufacturing process and waste management. So it was a pretty easy way for companies to start on that path. So yeah,
yeah.
certainly had a tremendous amount of help. One thing that
So
a lot of people don't know, Peter, is that the European Union, so wasn't just the subsidies on the price of the vehicles, or assisting in the cost and the purchase of the vehicles. The European Union also set out what was known as the CAFE rules, which are establishing CO2 emissions targets for vehicle manufacturers, right? So that meant
mm,
that manufacturers were down a journey whereby, depending on the calendar in which country, so most of them is 2035. The 2030, there's a big milestone, but also 2035. So it was forcing the manufacturers to sell a percentage of their fleet, of their total sales, as electric vehicles. And that was really there's a carrot and stick. The carrot were the incentives to the buyers, and the stick was the penalties to the manufacturers, right? That has also
mm,
had a big impact in that initial growth that we saw in 2020, 21, and 22, right? Because 23
mm,
EV sales have actually flattened across
yeah.
Europe.
And today there was an article. I'm sitting here in Sweden, and it says prices dropping on the EVs. Who are the losers here? Is it the individuals, the companies, or is actually the finance companies, or is the manufacturers? What does it look like? Because apparently, if we have a 20%, maybe even higher, due to as you say, Tesla's has been also doing a lot of price drops, which has driven the market downwards from the premium pricing. So who are the losers right now in that game?
Yeah, I mean, the drops that you're talking about have been monumental, and I don't think, unless you're in the industry, people realize how large that impact is. You're talking about, for example, in the UK, since 2023, since January 23 to February 24, the used car EVs have dropped over 30%, 34% in value, right? Market has lost value 13%, so petrols and diesels, but EVs 34%, Germany 20%, Italy 14%, right? And to put things into context, when we had the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, again, it was a cash crisis, so there was no money, so people couldn't buy products. The value of used cars dropped by 18%, right? And that was, a financial crisis globally. And we're talking about here drops that are significantly higher than what we saw in the 2008, 2009 crash, which, quite frankly, in answer to your question, it's bad for everybody, right?
There must be someone who's getting a bigger pain out of this. If that's the finance companies or the manufacturing, because there's a lot of leasing in behind here, I understand.
Correct. But again, and this is what I was going to point out, it is very rare that people purchase outright. Nobody shows up at a dealership and pays 100% of the car, right? That's rare nowadays. There's always some sort of financial instrument. And most financial instruments today, a lease, for example, or renting, as some people may call it, or PCP, PCH in the UK. In the end of the day, what people are paying for is loss of value of the vehicle. So I buy the product when it's new. I have it for 3 years. And what I'm doing actually is I'm paying for the loss in value during that period, plus the interest to the lessor, right? And the leasing company, to make the rate attractive, is assuming that after those 3 years, there's a value in that used car, right? So if they assume the value is going to be, they buy it for 100, they assume the value is going to be 70 or 60 after 3 years. If that value actually turns out to be 40, well, guess what? They've lost money, right? So a lot of the leasing companies around Europe have lost money and will lose money on EVs, especially on EVs that they sold during the course of 2020, 21, 22. And they are starting to make noise, right? So, for example, you have the likes of Avens, which is that joint lease plan, and ALD, Arval. They're already going back to manufacturers and saying, look, we're not going to continue leasing EVs if you don't give us some sort of protection to these drops in residual values, right? So these drops in residual values, the loser are the manufacturers, because again, the price that they can achieve on these vehicles continues to reduce. The leasing companies and the owners of existing vehicles, if they have purchased the vehicles. Right?
Yeah, if they have a second hand, absolutely. Yeah.
The winners are going to be the people who are going to buy an EV now, right?
So let's put you now. You're sitting in a mid-sized company, and you have a fleet of, say, 50 cars, and you are now to make the next investments, and you have a 3-year period here, which you have to consider. That's the lease agreements period about. And so what is happening? And we are looking now at European country, could be UK or anywhere in Europe, because we know also there's entries coming in, international entries. So how would you reason? Let's say you are the CFO now from a company, and you're sitting on these investments, and you want to make it right. What are the considerations to be done?
Well, the considerations. Typically in the automotive industry, when we talk about fleets, what we look at is typically what we call the total cost of ownership, right? So it's not just the cost of acquiring or the cost of holding that vehicle while you have it. So whether you purchase outright and then sell it or lease it, whatever financial mechanism you use, plus the cost of running that fleet, right? And I think one of the things that people do not appreciate is how inexpensive it is to maintain, run, and operate electric vehicles is, right? We have to bear in mind the any combustion engine roughly has 2,500 moving parts, which is crazy when you think about that. An electric motor has 3, right? It's that simplistic in its operation. And so the maintenance of electric vehicles over that 3-year period is actually incredibly low, right? Now, when it comes to the purchase, my advice, if anybody was going to go and buy EVs right now, is number one, don't purchase them outright. right? And that's because you still have so much volatility right now in terms of the
Mm.
residual value of the cars. And so you might be buying something right now, but the loss in value right now is substantially higher. And very uncertain than other types of vehicles. So my advice would be to make sure that you go through a financial instrument where you're leasing the vehicles, renting the vehicles, but basically not paying for the vehicle outright, that the future risk of that vehicle, the value risk of that vehicle lies with another party, right? And typically it's just that these are parties that are more capable because they have the infrastructure of being able to sell and buy and manage and have relationships with manufacturers that a 50 person or 50 car company would not be able to have. So that's one advice. And the second is, embrace it, talk about it with employees, explain. We do have to bear in mind that while the quality of the product in terms of EVs right now, it really is truly incredible, right? The technology they have, the performance they have, the quality of these vehicles is incredible. But what we do have to explain to people is that there is a change. There is a bit of a change in behavior. And normally what you find when they adopt EVs, you have the typical, wow, what a car, it accelerates, I love it. Then comes range anxiety, which is the normal journey that everybody goes through because it is different. I can't fill up my tank in 10 minutes, although, by the way, it's coming closer and closer that you can. And so there is a bit of a change of your behaviors and how you adapt to these circumstances. And what is inconvenient initially, as the habits start to form, I can charge at home. I can plan how I do my trips. But we always see that, at least in our business, where we have end consumers, the vast majority of them are using EVs for the first time. We actually watch and monitor that journey, how people behave. And it becomes then just a new routine. And once you have the new routine in, it is rare that you will speak to someone who's been an EV who will tell you, oh, no, I'm going to go back to a diesel or a petrol, right? It's rare because it's about managing that change and that transition.
So will European car industry, EV car industry, hold on to the Chinese entries, which we see are multiple, and it comes from top to entry, and maybe also the US. I don't know where they are. I'm certain you know more about that.
No, I think the U.S. If you just ignore Tesla, there's frankly no one else that's really coming quickly enough. You have a couple of players, Lucid, Fisker, that are trying to get into the market.
Yeah.
Lucid, very niche with the very premium cars. Fisker, unfortunately, just reported over $400 million net loss in Q4. They're talking about reducing staff. So all the small entrants that have tried to come into the EV space, except the Chinese, which we'll mention in a second, they have all really struggled. And even the major European manufacturers have struggled, let's be honest. But Tesla really is the exception. Tesla with the Model Y, first time ever that the most sold vehicle in Europe is actually an electric vehicle and of a non-European brand, right? So it's or a traditional, Japanese or Korean brand. But it's so Tesla is an exception. But you're right, the Chinese are coming, and that's part of the turmoil that you're seeing in the industry, because not only do you have electrification for the automotive manufacturers, which is a huge transition for themselves, you have obviously you have a whole change in the usage of vehicles, where people are preferring usership models rather than ownership models, which is where Onto has delved into. You also have the European manufacturers probably took on too much that they wanted to chew at the same time, which was electrification. And everybody loved this direct retail model, which was selling directly to the end consumer, where traditionally the automotive industry has always had the dealer, right? There was the manufacturer, the dealer, then the end consumer. And maybe, people not following the industry don't realize, but a lot of the manufacturers have, some of them have now postponed, but their intent was to terminate all their dealers and shift their sales model from a franchise model to what they're calling an agency model, right? So a lot of turmoil in a moment in time where you have very high interest rates. You saw consumer demand drop dramatically in 2023 because, again, rising interest rates, cost of electricity, Ukraine war, supply chain disruption. I mean, it hasn't been an easy time for everybody. And then now come the Chinese, right, which was your question.
Yeah.
And if you remember, in my case, I'm old enough, we had the Japanese in the 80s and the 90s, and then we had the Koreans. And they've made their dents, right? They've gained market share, they've grown, and now we have the Chinese. But I think the Chinese comes at a completely different scale, and I think at something that we have never seen before. The fundamental difference between what we saw in the 80s, 90s with the Japanese and the Koreans is that the Chinese actually control the supply chain. Right, and that is the one fundamental difference that I don't that probably isn't talked about a lot. But when you think
then you talk of the supply chain with the battery and the complete production, which the majority doesn't do. I mean, there are some investing into Northvolt and so on as a
correct. I mean,
co-investment.
it is by far clearly the battery is the number one item, but not just. I mean, China has become the manufacturing for location for globally, right? So even a lot of the traditional manufacturers in Europe, VW, BMW, Mercedes, a lot of their components are built in China. So I'm talking about even not just batteries, but regular components for petrol and diesel engines. So they control the supply chain, and it goes beyond that because the Chinese have been very active in terms of mining operations and trying to secure the mines across the globe and where to actually get the minerals required for the battery production. And that's what is fundamentally different, right? So they are controlling. So if you think of how the journey has been, European OEMs went to China, taught them the skills and the manufacturing, the joint ventures that we had for many, many years ago. And now the Chinese actually dominate, right? They control the price, they control the costs, and they're coming into Europe. And again, I've had the opportunity to drive a number of Chinese brands, starting from the traditionals like Volvo, Polestar,
Exactly.
which a lot of people are always surprised. Yes, Volvo is a Chinese company. But brands like those, BYD, NIO, and by the way, building absolutely incredible high quality product. And that is what I think is going to be fundamentally different than the other waves that we've seen where there was a quality, there was a cost advantage that the Japanese and the Koreans, for example, brought. But I think the Chinese are going to bring cost, quality, and they control the supply chains. Right.
So that means most likely that's over time here we will see a more competitive market. We clearly see that Tesla is driving volume and pressing, really trying to press not at least European manufacturers with their price drops. And I guess it's still the beginning of that, where we can also see potentially the Chinese coming in heavily on price with a great quality or greater quality as such. So something is happening here over the next coming years.
It's going to be a very intense competition between the traditional manufacturers. So whether they're European or the old American ones, there's very few of those now if we think about it. So the traditional European, Japanese, and Korean manufacturers against the Chinese that are going to be coming in. And they are going to come in aggressively with very aggressive prices, and they are going to have a significant advantage. I guess the big question is going to lie when you consider the millions of people that work in the automotive industry in Europe, not just through the manufacturers, but the suppliers of the manufacturers. One thing that you're going to question is what is the EU going to do about all this, right?
Yeah.
What is going to?
So it's a risk for customs, etc. potentially.
Correct. Right. What is going to be the reaction? But the competition is going to be clearly fierce. On the one hand, it's positive for consumers because they are going to have access to. I mean, when I think about a couple of years ago when I started really getting into EVs in 2019, and by the way, I was very late to the game compared to some of my colleagues. But there weren't many options, right? I mean, I was thinking about when we started onto, we had Renault Zoe, Nissan Leafs, Teslas, BMW i3. There's
Exactly.
maybe 4 or 5 cars you could go for. My God, there's a plethora of vehicles right now available on the market. It's incredible. The choice
Yeah.
is incredible. And you look at any manufacturer launching products, the first thing they'll say in their press release is launching 7 new cars this year, 10, 12 next year. It's incredible.
What the journey you are into and have been into right now, the onto journey, which is a subscription model, and we see that by Link, we see Volvo is experimenting, and I guess there's others. Could you just give a short brief of, the offerings which were out on the market, which apparently, with all things happening around, the timing is still not 100% perfect. But I'm interested to understand that because it changed also the purchasing behavior, and also if you see that's going to continue moving forward. Maybe it's to private consumers, I don't know, or if it's to corporate consumers also. But let's start with Onto a little bit.
Sure.
What were the real benefits for the consumers putting things together? Describe what it is.
Yeah, so Onto was born in 2017. Really started growing from the end of 2020. And the product that we were offering was the ability for a customer to subscribe to an electric vehicle for 1 month, so no deposit up front, 1 month. And it was an all-inclusive package, which is the car, the insurance, even the charging through the charging networks at the time that we had with Shell and BP. And so all-inclusive package, 1 month. So I download an app. I can book any type of range of vehicles. Onto had everything from Renault Zoe's, Corsa E's, Peugeot 208s, Citroen C4s, ID3s, Renault Megane E. I think we had 35 models up to Tesla's,
Hmm.
I-Pace, Jaguar I-Pace, Audi Q4 e-tron, and the full-size Q8 e-tron. So a huge range of vehicles available for a customer that the only commitment he had to make and the only payment he had to make is for 1 month, right? So a customer would download the app, find the vehicle he wants, pay with a credit card, vehicle delivered to their house, drive the vehicle for a month. At the close to the end of the month, the customer had the choice to, I can return the vehicle, no additional cost, just a collection fee that we charge for picking up the vehicle, or I can resubscribe the vehicle. And quite
Mm.
frankly, Onto went from less than 100 vehicles in 2019 to peaking at 7,200 vehicles on its fleet in 2023. And when I say that huge gain in volume was purely driven by demand. So consumers really want this product. There is absolutely no doubt that that is the one key success that Onto has been able to demonstrate, is that customers want this, right? And it was a wonderful opportunity for a lot of consumers. A lot of consumers at the time, and still even today, it's not an easy decision to say, okay, I'm gonna, I've been driving a petrol or a diesel my
Yeah,
entire life. I'm gonna
yeah,
go and spend 20,000. I wish 20, 30,000, 40,000, fifty
yeah,
thousand euros or more into an EV. So when customers saw the opportunity, wait a second, I can just download an app, book a car, it's delivered to my house, and then
yeah.
if I don't like it, I give it back. Fine, I'm going to try it.
Is
But when you
that
think of
if you look at the purchases, is it more the younger generation? I mean, we are many times brought up, we want to own it, but it's not
It's
interesting.
not. It was absolutely every spectrum. I will say that from a socioeconomic background, typically they're higher incomes, families, but also young people. But no, you cannot. It was actually a surprise for us, and how we then also had to tailor our different communications. It wasn't just the tech savvy entrepreneurs, millennials who don't have kids. Not at all. It
Mm.
was a wide range of people. And again, you also have to bear in mind, our most inexpensive vehicle was a VW E-Up electric, E-Up. I think it was
Yeah.
at the time 299 pounds a month, and you had the Audi e-trons at 1,300 pounds a month, right? So huge range of types of vehicles, which means a completely different type of consumer and a completely different type of needs. But the one need that I would say is a lot of people came onto by this ability to experiment, right? It was the ability to experiment with an EV with no downside, right? If I don't like it, I return the vehicle. And again, it's no secret to tell you that a lot of people did not return the vehicle, right? So we had people that ended up staying in the vehicle 3, 6, 9, 12. We have people today that are still in vehicles after 24, 25 months. It was just the simplicity, right? I go to the website, I see the car, I like it, I click it, it's delivered to my house. I don't have to worry about maintenance. I don't have to worry about, paying for the charging. I don't have to worry about.
There must have been a break even somewhere if you look at rental cars and having a car for a month. Where was that? Was it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or where? It
So
must be.
yeah, I mean, like all these fleets, the key is going to be around your utilization levels, right? So how
Okay.
much utilization is in the asset, right? A rental utilization is typically going to be in the 70%. So 30% of the time your fleet is not generating revenue, and bearing in mind that the typical rental length of in the rent a car industry is about anywhere between 3 and 7 days. Right, 7 days is already very very good. So you have a constant rotation of the fleet. In a subscription business, again, I don't want to give all the secrets away, Peter, but I can say that, yes, you have a percentage of people that stay in the car for a month, but you have a far, far greater percentage of people that stay in the car between 6 and 9 months, right? So clearly for us as a business, the people that stay in for a month is not profitable. But the minute you go over a certain number of months, it becomes a profitable business. And
Yeah, I
thankfully,
understand that.
the vast majority stay well beyond the 3 months.
So your prediction here is that with the EV industry as such, we will also see new sales model and purchasing patterns coming up with different subscription models. We know Link has, etc., etc. And these companies may reappear, maybe in a different format.
I don't think, how should I say it? The switch from an ownership model to a usership model was already well underway before EVs came here, right? We do. A lot of people don't realize this, but I have these wonderful conversations with people. Oh yeah, I own my car. Oh, so when did you buy it? Oh, how did you buy it? Oh, I lease it. You lease it. Well, guess what? You don't own it. It's not yours.
No, exactly.
So you don't actually own the asset. Somebody else owns the asset, and at the end of those 3 years, you return the vehicle, right? So people don't realize this, but this transition is already happening. What we're seeing now is those times of 3 years are shrinking, right? People want more flexibility. I want to have it for a month. I want to have the ability to, and we saw that in a lot of our customers. A lot of our customers, I think our record is one individual had 11 different vehicle models, right? Every 3 or 4 months, he would switch cars. Why? Because he could. It was very simple. I choose another car on the app and I drive something different. So I think that is going to be a trend that is going to continue. The trick is going to be in diminishing the intervals, right? I don't want it 3 years. I want it 2 years. I want it a couple of months. What EVs did, and what for us in terms of Onto was EV was also the perfect medium to introduce a more flexible usership model, also with a product that was coming new into the market in the case of EVs. And marrying the two together was a way to drive electrification, right? As I mentioned before, when you're thinking as a consumer that, okay, I really want to do the right thing, I want to buy an EV, 30, 40, 50,000 euros. It's a big investment. What if I don't like it? People talk about it. Well, wait a second. I can have for a monthly payment, not more expensive or not significantly more expensive than a traditional lease. And I can have an EV, and if I don't like it, I can return it. Well, I'm going to try it, right? So that was the reason for Onto for leveraging these two major trends, but also with obviously the mission of making it more accessible for people to come into EVs and try EVs, right? So removing those barriers.
And that is super interesting. I would love to go into another topic, but I think we're going to wait with that. And to really get this acceleration, it's the charging stations all over. I mean, we can drive these cars in Sweden, in the southern part, and then northern, but we see it's coming still in the buses, etc., etc. But let's keep that aside because we know that is ongoing, and it's going to take some time. And I guess that's where it really is going to have a switch in the industry when you can actually charge it everywhere, and there's fast charging. But I'm curious to end this off. So, what is the expected, based on your experience, the expected life cycle of EVs, and what happens when it goes to recycling, or when there is damages to the batteries due to crush or whatever, they hit a big stone or rock or something like that.
Yeah.
So, the life cycle and the recycling handling here.
So there's a couple of things to think about. So today, right now, the battery is a huge component of the car, and it occupies a formidable amount of space in the underbody of the vehicle, and incredibly expensive, right? With very
Mm,
complex chemistries and minerals. But one of the things that we have to bear in mind is that the cost of those batteries continue to decrease, right? And they will continue coming down over time. And today, when you have major accidents, one of the problems that you're alluding to, and again, the bad news travels fast, the good one doesn't. But the problem you're alluding to is that there's accidents, and when relatively you have body damage that typically in a petrol or diesel vehicle would be okay, because it's a fundamental part. The battery is a fundamental part of the actual chassis of the
mm,
vehicle. Let's call it that way. You damage the battery. And today, replacing those batteries are incredibly expensive, right? Because of the overall cost of the battery. So yes, there is a slightly greater percentage of that when the vehicles are getting into accidents, that the calculation that you make: do I repair or do I scrap this vehicle because I cannot, the repair or the cost of replacing the battery doesn't justify the overall value of the vehicle. That is still very high compared to combustion
mm,
and engine vehicle, but that is going down, right? So that is something that
mm,
right now is weighing potentially um, insurance companies when they're insuring vehicles. But we still have to understand that the actual percentage of vehicles that are actually being written off is a very, very small percentage. I mean, again, I go back to our own example at Onto. If you look at the percentage of vehicles that we were scrapping on a 7,000 car fleet, was not in excess of when I was at Hertz and I managed 120,000 cars. The percentage was not higher in the EVs. What you had was the
mm,
economic impact was higher, but the prosperity for that to happen was not higher.
mm,
But it is a reality. I think the important thing is, the costs continue to diminish. In terms
mm,
of recycling the batteries, again, right now there isn't a mass business opportunity because there aren't that many cars on the road. And if you think about it, a typical car is lasting 10, 12, 15 years on the road. We're really in an infancy of this industry. It really did not take off
mm,
in Europe. Okay, Northern Europe, there's some exceptions, but in the rest of Europe, it didn't really take off until 2019, 2020, right? So when we're
mm,
saying that EVs now account for roughly 16% of all sales in Europe, but in the used car market, they're less than 2%. Right? There's very,
mm,
very little old EVs out there in the marketplace. And yes, I think that with the as Europe continues to wind off fossil fuels, you start to see more and more that there are products in terms of solar panels in houses, battery packs to support those solar storage at home levels, right?
mm.
The minute you start seeing those industry grow, you're going to have a great source of batteries coming from used EVs, 5, 6, 10
Okay.
years from now, that are going to be able to go into those packs. So I think I have no doubt there hasn't been a need because there aren't a lot
Mm,
of batteries out there. You still have to think about, um, we sold 2 million EVs in Europe last year, 2 million in a 16 million new car, 12 million new car market, apologies, which is already a big proportion. But if you think of the total size of the used car market in Europe, which is 40 million, that's a drop in the ocean, right? It's still a drop in the ocean. So I think there is a huge opportunity, to be frank, for somebody to invest in EV battery recycling coming from electric vehicles. But yes, it's maybe there isn't enough supply, which is used EV batteries.
Yeah, it's coming.
It's coming.
So, Rui, I must thank you for your insights into this super exciting industry, which is in a big change with ups and, of course, some bumps on the road, which are always when there are bigger changes happening in the industry here. So, a big thank you for your insights and also the way the leaders in different companies should, reflect and think. And hopefully, there's think for everyone who's looking for an EV car.
It's a pleasure, Peter.
Thanks.